How many characters did Eddie Murphy play in The Nutty Professor? Why didn't Jerry Lewis make a cameo appearance in a remake of one of his most notable films? What famous scene was almost nixed by the studio, and why? These and more questions answered on this episode of
Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
If you give me a moment, I believe I can try to explain. My research is, when I started out, I wanted to help people. But then I became desperate and selfish. What I did was wrong. But it's who I thought the whole world wanted me to be. It's who I thought I wanted to be. And sometimes when you want something so bad, you'll do just about anything to get it. But I learned one thing from Buddy. I learned that life is not about being happy with how much you weigh, but about being happy with yourself. I'm terribly sorry about all of this. I hope I hadn't ruined everybody's evening. Please excuse me. Hi, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. Welcome back, friends. This is the 186th episode of Back Look Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that extremely large, distinguished-looking fellow over there about Back Look Cinema. Now, I've seen this movie many times. First, I've seen it in the theaters, and then a bunch of times at home or at somebody else's house. And every time I've seen it, I've always been delighted. Now, this episode is being released in honor and recognition of Juneteenth. Now, this is the Monday following Juneteenth. But because I don't know how scheduling or calendars work, this recognition is being addressed later than I meant it to. This is somewhat apropos, just as the Black Americans in Texas were 2 years late in learning that they had been emancipated from slavery. This episode is a few days late in recognition of Jubilation Day. I actually wanted to really think about what movie to explore in keeping with the themes of African American history and culture. My entry point into Black culture outside of my family was the popular music of the 1970s. Soul, R&B, gospel, disco, even DC's go-go music. Then there were the sitcoms that I loved in the late 70s and the early 80s, including What's Happening, The Jeffersons, Good Times, and Sanford and Son. And it took me a little longer to get into Black cinema. I was aware of movies like Shaft and some of the blaxploitation classics, but they always seemed a little too cheesy and adult for me. Eventually, I gravitated towards movies like Crush Groove, Break-In, and House Party. And that led me to more serious dramas like Juice, Boys in the Hood, and Menace to Society. This led me to have a great appreciation for the films produced by great Black creators. And I'm in love with the themes and the stories that these films continue to bring us to this day. I still feel like there's a huge bit of culture that's missing from my experience, but that being said, I wanted to take this moment to celebrate one of our cultural icons, and that icon is Edward Regan Murphy, comedian, actor, writer, producer. He's one of the greatest talents of our time. Getting his start as a professional comedian when other young men at his age were getting their start at minimum wage jobs, he was already a star at an age when most people were graduating high school. At the ripe old age of 19, his pal Joe Piscopo got him an audition that would change the course of his life, and he became a cast member of Saturday Night Live. From there, he got his breakout role as Reggie Hammond in 48 Hours and continued with several hits including Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America, Bowfinger, and other films that enrich both Black American culture specifically and American culture as a whole. Murphy has a singular skill of embodying the characters he plays, and he has the fantastic ability to play multiple characters in a film. One of the finest displays of this talent is in the movie that I wanted to discuss today, The Nutty Professor. So let's talk about that movie in the opening credits. The Nutty Professor, the remake from 1996. Professor Sherman Klump, a very large man who's self-conscious about his obesity, is on the verge of a scientific breakthrough. His research would revolutionize weight management that would allow people seeking to lose weight to change their very DNA without the need of traditional time-tested methods of diet and exercise. When a beautiful new woman joins the faculty at his university, he wants to go out of his way to impress her, so he takes this experimental weight loss formula to be the man that he believes that she wanted him to be. But the formula radically changes his personality as well as his looks. Gone is the considerate, affectionate, and good-natured Sherman Klump. In his place is the vain, selfish, rude loudmouth who calls himself Buddy Love. Buddy has his own agenda, and that includes permanently replacing the mild-mannered Sherman. The Nutty Professor was released June 28, 1996. Produced by Imagine Entertainment, it grossed over $128 million in the U.S. and Canada, and over $273 million worldwide on a reported budget of $54 million. That is amazing. And it's going to be even more amazing when we talk about the reviews for this movie. If we adjust it for inflation in today's dollars, then today it would have grossed over $262 million in U.S. and Canada, and it would have grossed $559 million worldwide, and the budget would have been $110 million. That's phenomenal. And I think I said this earlier, but every time I see this movie, I'm entertained every single time. The Nutty Professor starred Eddie Murphy as Professor Sherman Klump, Buddy Love, Lance Perkins, Papa Klump, Mama Klump, Grandma Klump, and Ernie Klump. That's 7 characters in this one movie. You may have also seen him in Harlem Nights, and we covered in episode 76, Beverly Hills Cop, and we covered in episode 4, Shrek, Mulan, and Dolomite Is My Name. Jada Pinkett Smith plays Carla Purdy. You may have seen her in Menace to Society. We covered in episode 42. A Low Down Dirty Shame, which I have to cover soon. Set It Off, that we covered in way back in episode 16. Scream 2 and The Matrix Reloaded. James Coburn plays Harlan Hartley. You may have seen him in The Great Escape, The Magnificent Seven from 1960, or Cross of Iron. Larry Miller plays Dean Richmond. You may have seen him in 10 Things I Hate About You, A Mighty Wind, or Pretty Woman. Dave Chappelle plays Reggie Warrington. You may have seen him in Half-Baked, Robin Hood Men in Tights, or Con Air. We covered all the way back in episode 6. John Ailes plays Jason, and he was in American Fiction and Who Are You People? And finally, Jamal Mixon plays Ernie Klump Jr., and he's been in Bulworth and Paul Blart Mall Cop. This movie was directed by Tom Shadyac, and you may have seen some of his other films, including Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, Liar Liar, Patch Adams, Bruce Almighty, and Evan Almighty. I don't think he's directed a lot of films, but he's definitely directed some of the funniest films that I've ever seen. This movie was written by Jerry Lewis, Bill Richmond, and David Sheffield. Now, obviously, Jerry Lewis, he was one of the greatest film actors of his time. He had written the original Nutty Professor, the movie from 1963. And he's also famous for the Jerry Lewis Muscular Dystrophy Association Labor Day Telethon. I remember watching that telethon, at least parts of it. I've never watched the entire telethon, but if you're too young to know what a telethon is, it's basically a TV show that lasts for like maybe 12 or 16 hours. And it's kind of like a variety show, but at the same time, there are celebrities at the phone banks calling people, asking for donations, or accepting calls where people are calling in and pledging donations for muscular dystrophy research. And I think that's what I remember him most for, because I don't think I've ever watched an entire Jerry Lewis movie. I've seen like bits and pieces of his movies, and I've seen him in a telethon, but I've never watched Jerry Lewis from beginning to end. Some of the movies that I missed were The Bellboy, The Ladies' Man, and The Errand Boy. All of these movies he's written, and most of the movies that he starred in are movies that he either wrote or co-wrote. And some of the movies that he co-wrote with Bill Richmond. So Bill Richmond, he co-wrote The Nutty Professor with Jerry Lewis, also The Errand Boy and Ladies' Man. And then he wrote a lot of sitcoms and variety show, and he's best known for The Carol Burnett Show. And finally, Sheffield he's probably the main writer for this remake. And he's written other projects that Eddie Murphy was involved in, including Boomerang and Coming to America. And he's also written Police Academy 2, Their First Assignment, and The Honeymooners, along with various other projects. The music for this movie was composed by David Newman, and he's also composed music for such movies as Night School, Girls Trip, Army of One, Tarzan, and Serenity, a very eclectic group of movies. And I wanted to give a special shout out to the special makeup effects by Rick Baker. I don't go further past the composer, but I wanted to recognize the incredible work that was done in the makeup department by Rick Baker. This is specifically the makeup that he did for Eddie Murphy when he played the Klumps and he played the exercise guru. And it was just an amazing work. You may have also seen his work in Planet of the Apes from 2001, Men in Black, The Wolfman from 2010, How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 2001. And that was interesting because it was pure torture for poor Jim Carrey. He actually had to go through a special torture resistance training in order to endure the makeup. And I think that most people know Rick Baker and how he basically rose into prominence in popular culture was that he was a makeup effects artist for Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. So that's it for the opening credits and for my announcements. As usual, please check out the shop at backlickcinema.com. And I'm still working on this shop called Bazaar de Alonzo. And now that we've talked about that, let us go to our favorite parts. So the themes of this movie were really easy to parse out. It's almost preachy. It's like it's shouting at you about what the theme of this movie is, and it's basically about self-worth. And you have Sherman trying to navigate the fat shaming that he has to endure, and he has to learn how to value himself. You know, he is struggling with low self-esteem, probably depression, and these are all the things that he has to navigate. And he has to learn how to value himself as he is and not try to masquerade as something that he's not. And what's interesting about this film is that I think a lot of films, especially in the earlier era, there are a lot of jokes made at the expense of obese people, fat people, overweight people. There are lots of jokes. Sometimes the fat person is in on a joke and he's part of the joke and he's laughing along with it. And it's basically seen as a safe type of person that you can make fun of. But in this movie, they treated fat jokes a little bit differently, where you can see the harm that fat shaming and fat jokes can do to a person, and how it could lead to low self-esteem, depression. You can really hurt somebody's feelings with these jokes. It's a very cruel type of punching down when you're making a bunch of fat jokes. And this is probably the first movie where I've seen something like that, where I've seen the effects of the type how these type of jokes can harm someone. And I think this is one of the things that they highlighted in the movie. So I think it's obvious that one of my favorite things about this movie is Eddie Murphy playing all of these various characters. His I feel like he really plays a different type of character, and when he's embodying Sherman Klump. I feel like a lot of times Eddie Murphy's is playing like different versions of himself. Maybe he's turning himself up a notch, or he's turning himself down a notch, and these are particularly in his comedic roles. But in this role, he really was a different character. Like he really was uh, playing somebody, probably somebody he knew, or somebody, or maybe it's a combination of characters. But this is really Eddie Murphy stretching his acting chops when he plays Sherman Klump, and really when he plays all of the Klump characters. One of my favorite characters that he plays is this character called Lance Perkins. Now, Lance Perkins is an exercise guru. He has uh, a bunch of exercise meals. No, not exercise meals. He has a bunch of low calorie meals that you can microwave and eat. And in the same vein as like Weight Watcher meals and whatnot. And it's clearly an impersonation of Richard Simmons. And I just thought that was delightful. It was, I don't know how, I should have did my research on how Richard Simmons actually felt about this impersonation. And I almost feel like Eddie Murphy had done impersonations of Richard Simmons before. And this is the first time that you've seen him do like a Richard Simmons impersonation in full makeup. Like it's obviously Richard Simmons. He's got the same frizzy hair. He's wearing the same outfits. He's talking like Richard Simmons. He has the same energy as Richard Simmons. It's just that this character is, I guess for legal purposes, is named Lance Perkins. So Eddie Murphy playing all of these characters, particularly that one, but really all of them. He just does an incredible job. It's like a good enough job where you're not even really thinking that all of these characters are being played by Eddie Murphy. That they're so different. Only in the sense that a lot of them are goofy enough that it's like they're exaggerated, and because they're exaggerated, you know that Eddie Murphy's playing them, but at the same time, they're all so different, right? And the differences that the characters have, they're is what draws you to them. I think the stark, well, the money shot, the scene that really hammers this incredible talent is the dinner scene with the Klumps when Sherman Klump is with all of his family. Obviously, all the entire family is being played by Eddie Murphy, except for the youngest child, and how the family members are talking with each other, arguing with each other, insulting each other, saying really lewd and ludicrous things to each other. it's, it's just it's just fantastic. And there were two of these scenes. There was one when Sherman is, with his family. The second scene is when he brings a date over to dine with his family. He brings Carla Purdy over, and really Grandma Klump just goes off on a tangent about sex and sexuality. Like it's almost like she had a speech ready that she had been wanting to get certain things off of her chest for a long, long time. And it basically serves to embarrass both Sherman Klump and his date Carla Purdy. So it's crazy. Also, I want to mention like the names of these characters. You have Sherman Klump, which rhymes it rhymes with lump. Maybe because the whole family is shaped like lumps. You have Carla Purdy because he's pretty. Even Dean Richmond is kind of funny because when you look at his name, he's a dean at the university, and he is basically always on a search for a rich donor to donate money to the school. And Sherman is causing all types of problems, causing the money that Sherman is causing the school to lose money, to have like the donors stop donating, and he needs Sherman to rectify that. And so he's got money on the brain. And Richmond, at first when I was watching this movie, it sounded like rich man. Not that Dean Richmond is rich himself, but he's constantly sniffing up the butts of rich men in order to get donations to the school. Strangely enough, that those are all of the really weird names that they have in the movie. But you have like Harlan Hartley. That's not a really weird name. Reggie Warrington is not particularly weird, but some of the other characters those were strange names. I'm not saying that's my favorite part. I'm just saying that's an observation that I made watching the movie. Another favorite part that I had was there's a workout montage. So this is before Sherman takes the formula. He decides to, like, Sherman is in a place where he will, a lot like me, because I'm overweight, I will get into a mode where I try to work out and try to control my diet so that I'm not eating too many fats and sugars and whatnot. And then you get into a mode where you start to exercise. So he gets into the mode where he's trying to exercise. He goes into an exercise montage, and that is delightful. It's a very funny montage. He's in the beginning of the montage, he's struggling with some of the exercises, and then near the end of the montage, he's better at the exercises. He's like where he could not finish the exercise when the montage started. By the end of the montage, he's able to complete the exercises that he started. He's able to do all the reps, and he's able to keep up with the people in the aerobics class and so on and so forth. But the montage was very funny, and it's one of my favorite parts. Also, what's interesting is that Sherman is immediately struck by the beauty of Miss Purdy, and he works up the nerve to ask her out on a date. And she's not really all that bothered by how big he is. She enjoys being with Sherman. She already admires Sherman because of his research. She thinks he's brilliant. And then they go out on a date, and they have really good chemistry when they're out on that date. They have a really good time together, and the date kind of ends on a sour note when the comedian that they go to see, Reggie, what's his name? Reggie Warrington. The comedian starts, he's one of those comedians that like to pick on people in the audience. Now, there are a lot of people that do this. And so the comedian is going around the room kind of picking on everybody. He's, not everybody, but the people nearby in the front row that's closer to the stage. Usually a comedian would pick on one or two people and then move off and then go on to the whatever prepared routine that he has. But when Reggie gets to Sherman, he starts to pick on Sherman like hard. And then he picks on Sherman for like the whole act because he think he's getting all this laughter from picking on this fat man. So he's going to basically make the fat man his act. And it's embarrassing to Sherman, and it's ruining the whole date. It's ruining the vibe of the date. Miss Purdy feels bad for Sherman because he has to put up with this humiliation of this comedian basically shaming or basically fat shaming him in front of the entire club, in front of this huge crowd. And that was the factor that kind of, after a bout with depression, that's what kind of drove him to take his experimental formula that would restructure his DNA to make him lose all of his weight. The consequence of him achieving this fit body was a total personality change. It's like as Buddy Love, he was kind of considerate, but as Sherman Klump, he was kind of considerate, but as Buddy Love, he's really kind of a jerk, and he's a jerk to pretty much everybody he's around, right? So, and apparently this has something to do with skyrocketing testosterone levels in his system. That was a consequence of taking the formula. So because he doesn't see himself as Sherman anymore, that's why he gives himself the name Buddy Love. And there's a funny sequence when Buddy Love is on a date with Miss Purdy, and they go back to the same comedy club, and the same comedian comes up, and now that the tables are turned and Buddy Love is in the place of Sherman Klump, now Buddy Love is going to go and humiliate the comedian, which is a very fun sequence. It was very funny. You basically had two incredible comedians with Eddie Murphy and Dave Chappelle on stage together doing a bit, and it was fantastic. And this was before Dave Chappelle was like, I don't know if I knew who Dave Chappelle was at that time. I don't think I knew him. I pretty much knew him later on. When I seen other comedy specials on TV, I would see Dave Chappelle, and I became a fan because of those specials. But I don't think I knew who he was when he was in this movie. Another thing that I like about this movie, there were some fantasy moments that Sherman had. So Sherman, like if he's watching TV, he might start watching TV. He'll fall asleep and he'll start dreaming, and then he'll dream about something that he saw on TV. So one of the fantasy moments was he's watching, I think the movie is called From Here to Eternity. And so there's this famous scene on the beach where the lead actor is kind of chasing the lead actress on the beach, and they fall down on the beach and they start kissing, and it's, all very romantic with the music swelling and the water of the beach running over their bodies. It's a very cool visual. And Sherman falls asleep on this, and he starts to dream about him and Miss Purdy, and he's chasing Miss Purdy down on the beach in the same way in the movie that he was just watching. And then they fall down together, and then they start kissing. But the problem is that because he's on top of Miss Purdy and they're on sand, Miss Purdy starts sinking into the sand. And now they're both horrified. And he's trying to rescue Miss Purdy from sinking all the way down into the sand. And that's when he, wakes up in a cold sweat or whatever. But that was a funny part. Another funny fantasy moment was there is this Fatzilla moment where I forgot exactly what he was watching that caused him to have this dream, but he dreams that his eating is getting out of control and he's getting larger and larger, and next thing you know, he's 7 stories tall, and at the end of the dream, he lets out this humongous fart, and it's like the fart causes hurricane force winds. So that was fun. This movie is the master of montages. So I really love the montage of the skinny Klump. Like, this is after Klump loses all of his weight and he's basically Buddy Love. And as Buddy Love, he starts wilding out. And so there is a montage of Buddy Love doing all of the Sherman Klump things. He's like taking all the exercise classes. He's going shopping because now he needs an entirely new wardrobe because now he's too skinny for all of his old clothes. So him wilding out at the exercise studio and him wilding out at the clothing stores, those were all funny moments. And I really like that. I like that montage. It was incredibly enjoyable. So this movie, I think this leads me to say that this movie does montages extremely well and effectively. It's showing, I think it effectively conveys the passage of time, and it's really good at conveying that emotion that both Sherman Klump had during his montage and then Buddy Love has during the Buddy Love montage, because Buddy Love is overjoyed at his newfound fitness, right? He's fit for the first time in his life, and he is ecstatic and elated and infectious in a way. Like, he's having the best time of his life. He wants everybody to know it, and it's almost like he wants to share it with everybody. There's also this thing where the transformation into Buddy Love isn't permanent. So you'll see him start to transform back into his former self, Sherman Klump. First, maybe his lip would become fat all of a sudden, or suddenly his voice would become deep. So one of these moments is when Buddy Love is on a date with Miss Purdy. On one of the dates, I can't remember which one. So on one of the dates with Miss Purdy, he realizes that he is starting to shift back into Sherman Klump. Like, he has a huge fat lip, and he makes the excuse to Miss Purdy that, he's having an allergic reaction to something. He has to go and run and get some Benadryl. So he runs out of the restaurant. He leaves her in the restaurant. He runs into the car, and on his way out, he goes to pay for the dinner with the credit card. The credit card has Sherman Klump's name on it. There's somebody working at the restaurant who recognizes that this is one of Sherman Klump's student, and he sees the credit card belongs to Sherman Klump, but the guy who left the credit card was not Sherman Klump, and he's going to confront this guy. It's like, hey, how'd you get this card? You're not Sherman Klump. And he follows the guy all the way into the car, the guy being Buddy Love, and they're both in the car, and the student is demanding some answers, like, what are you doing with Sherman Klump's credit card? And then Buddy Love starts driving the car, and at the same time transforming back into Sherman Klump. And it's like, it's very chaotic. It's like, first his hands puff up to a large size hand, and then it'll revert back to a skinny hand, and different body parts just blowing up into fat proportions and then reverting into a smaller size. It just different parts while Sherman Klump is trying to drive the car. And it's in front of the students. So the student is in shock. There's a moment where Sherman's whole face comes back. His body is still skinny. His body is still Buddy Love, but his whole face comes back. And he says, "Hi, Jason." Jason is the student. and obviously Jason is in shock. And so finally, Sherman completes the transformation. He's completely Sherman Klump, but they're driving a tiny sports car. So they have to call the fire department in order to cut Sherman out of the car because he's too big for the car. Like, had he tried to get into the car before he had transformed, he would not have been able to get into the car. It would have been impossible because he's too big. And obviously the fire department has no way of knowing how Sherman had gotten into the car in the first place. They had to use the jaws of life to get him out the car. So that was pretty funny. Now, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will say that the special effects on the transformation has not aged well. And that's true. But my feeling is that this movie is funny enough where the special effects don't really matter that much. It's like, yes, special effects are going to age, both the CGI effects and the practical effects. They're all going to age, all going to be able to tell that the effects are being used. But I think that the more people enjoy a movie, the more they forgive the special effects. So I'm not all that bothered by the special effects, the aging of the special effects, because I enjoy the movie enough where it doesn't really bother me. I also think this movie was really smartly written. I had planned on watching the original, The Nutty Professor, but never got around to it. But with this movie in particular, I think they did some really smart things with it. I think the premise is a little bit different. I'm pretty sure that in the original version, it wasn't that the professor or the scientist was not obese. It was something else about him where he needed to transform into Buddy Love. But in this movie's case, it was about Sherman Klump and Sherman Klump being fat. Or not so much Sherman Klump being fat, but Sherman Klump's relationship with his own health and his own obesity, and how he felt about it, how he felt about himself, and navigating what he thinks other people want from him, or trying to meet other people's expectation, dealing with depression, all of these things that Sherman Klump is dealing with, and the pressure that he feels in order to be Buddy Love. So at the end of the movie, there's a fight between Buddy Love and Sherman Klump. That's another one of my favorite parts. It's really Sherman Klump fighting himself. It's at a point where Buddy Love is transforming back into Sherman Klump. There are different body parts that are getting big and then getting small again, and getting big and getting small. And it's like the big fat parts are punching the small skinny parts. And then there are times when like he's punching himself in the head. And and basically Sherman is trying to prevent Buddy Love from drinking a formula that would make the transformation permanent. Like, Buddy Love is still Sherman Klump. So he's still brilliant. It's like there's a personality change, but his intelligence doesn't change. So he was able to figure out how to adjust the formula so he can make the transformation permanent. And so Sherman has to fight him to keep him from taking a formula that would really get rid of Sherman Klump forever. And Sherman's goal was basically to fight off Buddy Love until he was completely transformed back into Sherman Klump and in control of his own body. So that was a fun fight. That was a fight that was, it was goofy and improbable, but somehow it worked. And that was one of my favorite parts. I really enjoyed that. There are lots of parts here that I did not talk about that. I'd be eager to know what your favorite parts of the Nutty Professor is. I'm pretty sure I skipped over your favorite part. So if you want to write in and let me know what your favorite part is, feel free. Let me know or leave a comment below on the video. This is not a video. This is just audio. But you know what I'm talking about if you're watching on YouTube. But as I said, in conclusion, I had a ball watching this movie. It was still as funny as it was when I had watched it years ago. I hadn't seen this movie in a long time, probably 20 years. No, I take that back. I seen bits and pieces of it maybe a few years ago, but I didn't sit there and watch it from beginning to end. And I might be mixing this up with the Nutty Professor too, because it was on television and it was showing movies. They were showing both movies back to back. So I've seen bits and pieces of both movies, but it's still funny. And I that's what I look for in a comedy. I'm looking for it to make me laugh. And I'm looking for the mirth and the merriment and the making of the silly jokes. And like I said, I thought it had a really smart story to boot. So, and you know, a heavy-handed lesson, if there is a lesson to be learned. So that's it for some of our favorite parts. And now let's take a look at the top 10 trivia. Or the trivia top 10. I got all of these from IMDb, I'm pretty sure. And I learned some fascinating things. For instance, in the scene with Eddie Murphy and Dave Chappelle, their dialogue was mostly improvised, which is kind of what you probably expect from two master comedians. The family scene was nearly cut out of the final film due to lack of relevance to the film's plot. But the Klump family turned out to be one of the most popular elements of the film, so much that the Klumps got a greatly expanded presence in the sequel, The Nutty Professor 2, The Klumps from 2000. And yes, I agree that the Klump segment was an incredibly funny segment and very well done. The grandma was a standout character, and even like the character, like the best character of the other characters besides Sherman Klump that Eddie Murphy played was Mama Klump, where he plays Klump's mother, and he has a very it's like what you would expect a mother who loves her son. He conveys that extremely well in this movie. Eddie Murphy admitted in an interview with that Grandma Klump is just his impersonation of comedy pioneer Moms Mabley. And when you see videos of Moms Mabley and you see Grandma Klump, you get it. You get the reference. Eddie Murphy handed Jerry Lewis the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Oscar. He said before handing it to him, from one Nutty Professor to another. That was, well, how do I say this? That was a sweet moment. I guess I could say it that way. That sweet, that a good enough word. Eddie Murphy said that even though he was playing an enormously overweight character, he had to keep himself in the best physical shape of his career. This was because he needed to look suave and athletic as Buddy Love, and also because he needed to be comfortable while wearing the heavy appliances and prosthetics for his scenes as the Klump family members. You got to imagine that takes a lot of effort to get Eddie Murphy to look like that. I'm not sure how much the suit weighs, but it took about 3 hours for him to get into makeup. So that's definitely a lot of time and effort. Consideration was briefly given to superimposing Eddie Murphy's face on Jamal Mixon's body during the dinner scenes, but the effects tests were deemed unsatisfactory. Mixon became the only actor other than Murphy to play a member of the Klump family in this film or its sequel. And this reminds me of the movie Central Intelligence, where Dwayne Johnson's face was superimposed over Vine star Sion Kalepi's face to play a younger version of Dwayne Johnson's character. And I think they perfected the technique. This is definitely something that they had considered doing for the Nutty Professor, but as I just read, the effect didn't look right. But by the time Central Intelligence came out, I feel like they perfected the technique. It looks freaky, like that. It's an early scene in the movie. It looks freaky as hell, but but somehow they made it work. Jerry Lewis, who starred in the original Nutty Professor from 1963, was set to make a cameo, but pulled out after expressing dissatisfaction at the fart jokes in the script. Lewis didn't like the fart jokes at all and suggested that those jokes diminished his original film. So yeah, he wasn't liking it. He wasn't liking it at all. The studio initially objected to having Eddie Murphy portray all adult Klumps, since hiring 4 additional actors would be much cheaper than the additional filming days required for Murphy to undergo multiple costume and makeup changes. Murphy devised a special screen test with makeup artist Rick Baker in which he portrayed Mama and Grandma Klump to convince the studio executives otherwise. And they were convinced, and it worked. It was a wise investment. It was a smart risk. When Eddie Murphy was interviewed by Jay Leno on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno in 1996, Jay asked if he would appear in public as one of these characters. Murphy said he went outside walking down the street as Sherman Klump and was getting odd looks from those seeing him. The abusive nightclub comic is named Reggie Warrington after Reginald Hudlin and Warrington Hudlin, who worked with Eddie Murphy on the film Boomerang from 1992. And so that was trivia. I hope I answered some of your questions. I hope that you learned something, you found out something new, some interesting bits of trivia about this movie. And now we'll talk about what the critics thought. I had suggested earlier that the scores were shocking. So the critics gave it a 64%, as you might expect. But the audience score is 44%, which I don't understand. I don't know. I can't tell you why it's like that, because the movie was a hit. And not only was it a hit, I think it continued to be a hit on DVDs and Blu-ray and home viewing. I'm pretty sure it was a ratings winner for any TV station that aired it. So I don't understand why it's only 44%. And IMDb Reviews gives it 5.7 out of 10, which sort of splits the difference between the critic score and the audience score. So to get some insight, I guess, let's check out what some of these critics are saying. Rob Gonsalves from Rob's Movie Vault wrote, "This cruder, more sexualized update of the Jerry Lewis classic is also more consistently funny and imaginative." Now, I haven't seen the original. Like I said, I should go ahead and check it out. Should I check it out, it'll be the first movie that Jerry Lewis did that I watched from beginning to end. And I should investigate this. But I trust that he is correct. Wesley Lovell from CinemaSite wrote, "It spends too much time trying to find laughter and not enough time speaking out against fat shaming and our weight-obsessed culture." So I think this is a later review because I am not sure that the phrase fat shaming was in the lexicon when the Nutty Professor came out. I don't remember hearing anybody saying that phrase. I think that I've only started hearing that phrase in like I guess since the pandemic, or probably shortly before the pandemic, that I started hearing people use the phrase fat shaming. And I don't think it needed to say more about it. Like, it's a comedy. It's not a drama. And it's supposed to try to find laughter. And I think it did a pretty good job of talking about or speaking out against fat shaming. I think it did a pretty good job of that. It's almost preachy. The only way they could have said more about fat shaming is if it were a drama, which it is not. Richard Skickle from Time magazine wrote, Murphy is able to invest his Professor Klump with an enduring dignity, give his lounge lizard alter ego Buddy Love an alligator's bite, and then go on from there to play Klump's grandma, also his mother, father, and brother. And that is correct. That's what I was talking about. This amazing work that Eddie Murphy did playing all of these characters is notable. And then we have Louis B. Hobson from Jam Movies. The Nutty Professor offers great sight gags and some hilarious slapstick, but even 4 writers are unable to find enough plot and dialogue to justify the visual effects. Now, I'm not in agreement with this assessment. No, I think this movie is just right. Finally, The Nutty Professor is, as of this recording, available on Netflix. The next episode will be an episode swap with a podcast called Retromade. I was on that show on season 1, episode 12, to talk about The Thing, which I had never seen before. So I wanted to share this episode with you, and I was able to have a wonderful conversation with the host. Her name was Katie, and we talked about The Thing, and she was doing a theme that involved Kurt Russell, and that was a very interesting movie. And I wish I had seen it when the movie had first came out. I don't have that nostalgic feel for it that some of my colleagues have, and I don't have the love for it. I wish I had the love for it that they have, but I don't necessarily have that level of love for it. But we still had a great conversation about the movie The Thing. So I will be having that on the next episode, and I hope you tune in to, or I hope you download it. I guess you're not tuning in. I guess you're downloading. I hope you stream it. I hope you download it. I hope you get into this conversation that we're having about The Thing that I did on Retromade. And you can follow us on Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Instagram, and sometimes Twitter. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlookcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. One last time, if you like the show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlook Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe. Share a movie from yesteryear with your family. Hug your loved ones. And if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.